Topic 5.4, the impact of all these agricultural practices. We're gonna go through some of the issues we face trying to grow food for these. Right now, I think 7.4, 7.5, 7.3 billion. And then looking at having a maximum around 9 billion by 2040, 2050, maxing out about right then. Most scientists don't think we're going to get too much over 9 billion the way we're going right now. These are the challenges we're going to be facing. We need about 50% more food to feed those extra people, but we really, right now, we're taking over so much land surface that it would be really beneficial if we do not use more land than we already use right now. And to use less land, but also we also want to continue to grow food, but use less fossil fuels to do it. So we want to try to lower emissions, okay, and better ways to feed. Eating less meat would be the number one thing we can do to use less CO2. Eating meat is tremendously damaging to the environment. There's just no way about it. And I love chicken, beef, my burgers. But if we just eat less, that would be a huge improvement. To not eat at all any meat is hard for most people to think about. But plant-based solutions, like there's a lot of really good meat substitutes. However, they do necessitate a lot of sophisticated uses of chemistry to produce. And then hopefully different breeds of crops that can help us out in that regard. So the College Board wants you to mainly think about tilling, slash and burn farming and use of fertilizers as agricultural practices that can really damage the environment. And let's go through some of these things and then some others. This is deforestation, so write that down, deforestation. In order to grow crops, we have to clear it. A lot of times on that land is a forest, and we know forests are amazing for biodiversity. Animals, plants are in the forest that we need, but we're wiping out those forests. And on this map, you can see this is early 21st century because a lot of the forests in the eastern United States and Europe, and of course the Middle East, is classic for forests that have been wiped out. But what we're doing now in the early 21st century, we can see a lot of India, a lot of Mexico, parts of South America, then Africa, are being wiped out to grow crops. Right now, in Indonesia, a lot of land, a lot of rainforests being removed. So deforestation, lowering our biodiversity is something that we need to be extremely concerned about. And of course, opening that land up. Once you remove the forest, you remove the ability of those trees and plants to hold the land there. So increasing likelihood of deforestation or desertification, increasing the chances that it will one day become a desert. This is an example of monocropping, where you take one crop and put it over a huge area. One crop over a large area. And that's efficient. So this is very efficient. You can easily create a lot of food in a smaller amount of area. But it's more vulnerable to pests. So write down pest vulnerability. Okay, one type of moth, one type of fungus could easily come in and wipe out that whole crop you see up there. Whoo! Not very limited genetic diversity, of course, if it's monocrop, and also that one crop hitting it year after year after year, it decreases the soil nutrients. So decrease soil. Ooh, you can't see that. Nutrients. So when that happens, you gotta hit it with more more fertilizer, potentially more pesticides too. So that is something it's degrading our land. This is called fragmentation. So fragmentation of habitat. And as you can see, you're basically taking, like, here's a picture of what it looks like right here. You're chopping up the habitat into these different sections, and you're making it very hard for the plants and animals within those sections to survive. And what we have, you have interior and edge species, different plants and animals that do better on the margins and then some in the interior. So here, these animals have all this area to function in, but here you can have the same amount of area, but there's just not as much interaction, and the fact they're not continuous creates real problems. So you have fewer of these interior species, like here, these birds and those like bears and these little lizards here. And then you increase the number of these edge species that do better on the edge habitats, like squirrels, deer. And that's going to put it out of balance. 6 or 7, maybe more species go out of balance, and you're going to have fewer numbers and lower diversity. Write that down. Lower diversity, and you could have extinctions. We do that a lot in LA. Our cougar populations, our mountain lions. We have a lot of habitat in the LA area, but it's fragmented, right? There's roads, bridges, freeways, communities going through our natural areas. And that's splitting up the habitat, making it extremely difficult for those mountain lions. This right here is called slash and burn agriculture. Slash and burn. It's just like what it sounds like. They come through, cut down the forest, and then they set it on fire to provide area to plant those crops. Very efficient. It works well for a few years, but the soil fertility decreases dramatically after a couple of years. So soil fertility decreases dramatically. Okay, after a little while. Then guess what? If nothing's growing on it, you gotta go slash and burn a whole new area. So it just goes on and on and on and on. Now, on a limited scale, that works fine. And that's kind of what our ancestors used to do thousands of years ago, because there weren't that many of us. Because this will recover, right? But nowadays it might not, because we're just able to clear so much more land. This area, forests generate their own rainfall. And if large areas of forest are cut down, there's going to be less rain. And if there's less rain, you're not going to have trees growing back nearly as much. Groundwater depletion. So write that down, groundwater depletion. This is when, of course, our irrigation, we pump out groundwater, and that depletes that groundwater. It becomes more energy intensive to pump over time. The soil level will sink. A lot of parts of California around Sacramento have sank 10, 20 feet down. It's called subsidence. And that creates issues. Also, the soil can become, too much salt can be deposited on the soil. It's called soil salination. And as you can imagine, if you have salt in salt and plants don't mix. Salt kills plants. So that's a problem. Also, let's see, as I mentioned that, you take water out of the groundwater, out of rivers, and it's going to affect the water availability downstream. Another aspect right here, this is called eutrophication. So basically, too much nitrogen and phosphorus from runoffs. Not just, this looks like some storm drains, but this is really from streams and rivers too. Adds all those extra nutrients to the water. That makes algae grow. And that algae can block the sunlight for other plants that should normally be there, that are native and healthy for that habitat. And those algae don't live very long. They die. And that decomposition of the algae uses oxygen, and that depletes the oxygen. So the death of algae leads to decomposition, and that uses oxygen. And then the fish die. They don't have enough oxygen to breathe, and that leads to nasty looking rivers. You don't want to see this in a river or a lake or in the ocean, but we're seeing that more and more. This is all about pesticides. When you apply the pesticide, you don't kill all of the insects. There are some that are resistant. So this one has resistance genes, DNA that helps it fight back against the pesticide here. So look, it's still alive, and a couple survive just by accident. So they go to reproduce, and you have a lot more of these resistant bugs laying around. You apply the pesticide, it kills off the least resistant, the ones that don't have the resistance, and now you have a higher population of pesticide resistant bugs. So this creates it doesn't create them because they're already there. Let me rewrite that. It leaves a situation where the pesticide is less effective because of more bugs are resistant. More bugs are resistant. So then you got to use more pesticides, which creates more bugs. It goes on and on. In case you don't know it, this is called tilling the soil on on a scale for a farm. So you have a tractor and you have those plows. It's basically a plow. You've heard of plows before. They turn up the soil and they flip it over, and look, you have this nice grass. Now you have all this dirt where you can have erosion, runoff, the bacteria and the natural components of the soil are damaged. So the natural bacteria in the soil get damaged. There's carbon in the soil that gets released into the atmosphere. You know, that's a greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide, and methane being released there. And they do it to plant seeds, so it's tilling to, because they're going to plant seeds. But you know, there's a consequence to doing it this way. It's very efficient, but it causes all these negative, you know, erosion, runoff, disrupts that natural soil bacteria. And here you have, you know, the erosion. We can see it in front of our eyes. This dirt is leaving. It's going into streams instead. This natural soil, probably the clay first, and then the silt. Sand, remember, it is left behind. So whatever's left behind there is probably the larger pieces, the larger pieces of soil, the larger pore size. Now, what this is a dairy farm. Fairly typical. You have all these animals outside, farting, eating, pooping, and usually what happens is they have a lagoon for all the poop. And they try to regulate this so it stays here and then breaks down, but a lot of times this ends up in streams, in the groundwater. This is the same for any kind of industrial production of animals. Cows for dairy, cattle for beef production, pigs for pork production, chicken. You have a similar setup where you have all these animals housed. They're being fed and they're pooping. You're getting rid of that poop, usually by putting it into a lagoon. Problem is, a lot of times it just doesn't go well and it leaks out and then goes into our water. Here we have another, just kind of showing you the scale of all of this. And you can tell that could create a problem, right? All that ground is being trampled on, dust is being kicked up. That's going into the air. You have that center pivot over here. That's kind of interesting. You notice that circular agricultural field. That's a center pivot system. So it is, you know, kind of, there are ways to do it better though. And we'll get into these. You can rotate the crops so you don't deplete the soil. So different crops. They utilize the soil nutrients differently. Some will put back, legumes will put back nitrogen. Things like, you know, beans return nitrogen to the soil. Reduce the tillage, so don't turn up the whole, don't rip everything up. Do a more targeted planting of the seed. You're not going to lose as much of the soil from erosion that way. So just less disruption. Work on that handwriting. Efficient irrigation. So use less. That means your rivers and your groundwater aren't going to be as depleted. Reducing depletion of rivers and groundwater, and also less runoff. So any fertilizer or pesticide is in that field, you're going to have less of it going into the rivers and lakes. And then integrated pest management, basically ways to use less chemicals, and we'll go into that later. So use less chemicals. So don't despair. There are ways to fix this. We just have to do them.